I want to ask you some questions, cause I don't know what's real anymore. And I hope this doesn't turn into a rant about the fabric of reality itself crumbling before us. I really do hope Jim Carrey is okay, but me myself, I'm not quite there yet. Still, I would be lying if I told you everything's alright, cause at the moment I'm left in a deeply troubled place. So this is what I want to talk about. I've seen Blade Runner 2049 a couple of days ago, and it just doesn't let go of me. But first, I need to backtrack a little bit. The original Blade Runner is probably my favorite piece of art created by humanity as of now. Art has always influenced me heavily in my life from very early on, and probably will until I die. That's just the way it goes. Especially movies. And I don't really want to pick one, because there are so many great ones, but if somebody put a gun to my head and made me choose, it would be Blade Runner. And following the release of this new one, I was able for the first time to see it on the big screen, and that was an amazing experience. It actually came as a double feature, both movies back to back, but at the time I had to leave early and only caught about the first hour of Blade Runner 2049. For those of you who've seen it, which I hope is everyone watching this video, you know the movie can't be judged based on that, because there's some important stuff to unpack that only comes by the last hour of the movie, or even right up until the end. And by now, most of that has been analyzed, talked about, dissected, and probably better than I can do. But there is something that hit me the hardest, and I haven't seen discussed at all. So I want to know if that's just my perception and I'm alone in that, or if what I think is actually real. I have now watched the movie for a second time in its completion, and in the end I felt gut punched and left bleeding on the floor, much like Ryan Gosling's character in the final scene. I would have never expected this movie would almost switch genres with its final impact on me. I expected philosophical sci-fi, but for me it transcended that and turned into what I would call a soul eater. You know, movies like Irreversible, for example, Let the Right One In, or to name another Denis Villeneuve movie, Enemy. These movies, they deeply disturb and affect me, but I admire them for exactly that. So like I said, I'm not sure if that was intentional by the creators, or if that is even really there. But the ending of Blade Runner 2049 did exactly that to me, and I couldn't stop thinking about it since the second the credits rolled. Because I feel like I'm getting paranoid over it. Everything hints to this, yet nobody talks about it. But with this insane level of attention to detail that was put into this movie, one has to assume every choice they made, everything has a meaning. And what should be noted from the start is that Blade Runner 2049 is not Blade Runner 2. It's not a sequel per se. And they didn't call it Blade Runner 2. They called it Blade Runner 30 years later, and it is a Blade Runner for this generation. Its relevance was shifted accordingly 30 years into the future, because this movie is about us now, and it's relevant now. And from a filmmaking standpoint, it is almost the opposite of the original. Again, that had to be their intention, to give the viewer this experience and not experience the old Blade Runner again, which for me was always comforting in a way. Watching it, you long for this dystopian universe presented. You can almost feel the rain on your skin, the steam in the air. It sounds like a paradox, but it emitted warmth for me when I watched it. And that might have been different watching the original back then when it came out. But watching Blade Runner 2049 now, at the place and time we're now, and the age I'm now, it feels like the complete opposite. There is no tangible atmosphere. Everything from the framing of the camera, which is 90% wide or super wide shots, to the score, the acting, everything that creates mood makes you feel so alone, distant, cold, empty. You would never ever want to live in that world. And it's even scarier because it's very much related to our world right now. There are constant reminders in the society, technology, and so on. So I marvel at the filmmaking quality, but I'm also frightened and disturbed by what it creates. And I can take or leave single scenes, or parts of the story, that's a whole nother discussion, and feels almost irrelevant to me now. The way the movie impacts me is rather on a meta level, because experiencing it, I have all this and the memories of the old one and watching that movie in the back of my head while I watch Blade Runner 2049, and they know that. This is not just fan service for those who know the original. This is an extension of that and builds on it. But this new experience with Blade Runner 2049, and especially the ending it leaves you with, is much more cynic and nihilistic. I feel the original had a happy ending no matter what version you watched, what cut of the movie. Rutger Hauer delivers one of the most heartwarming moments, and our protagonist couple is alive. They might be on the run, but they are together and there is hope. Even heavy metal elevator doors closing between us and them couldn't stop that. And now the ending of Blade Runner 2049 is a mirror image of that, but subverts it, inverts it to this upside-down dark version. Ryan Gosling's Kay is our equivalent to Roy Batty. When he dies, he doesn't need words, but there is the snow melting on his hand like we had the rain on the rooftop back then in the original. And they give us the musical reminder because they play Tears in Rain by Vangelis. I think the only untouched piece from the soundtrack that was carried over. And we start being manipulated by that cue. We feel nostalgia. It's like Deckard says when these holograms of a lost time in Las Vegas play Elvis Presley's Can't Help Falling in Love. Rick Deckard says, I like that song. And that's now the movie itself doing that to us, pushing our buttons. We romanticize it. This is Gosling, who we followed as our protagonist Kay and rooted for, and he is having his moment in time. But then we cut inside, where we see, I think her name is Anna, Deckard's daughter, and she is his representation of love, the love for Rachel, and she is engineering the snow. Not literally the snow we see outside with Kay, but she might have given him a happy memory of playing in the snow as a child once. So now he feels this affection for snow. And the first line she says after Kay's death scene, which is part of the last line in the movie as a whole, is just one moment, referring to Deckard entering. So what we just experienced, thought to be real, this sacrifice for someone suffering for love, like a real hero, a real human being. It's not real. It won't stay here forever. It's just a moment. And the device, the actual prop she uses to create this fake memory is basically camera lenses melted together. And she uses it like a focus puller would use his tool. Like the very filmmakers that created this fake memory that made us feel emotions, the movie Blade Runner 2049 itself. Like they used their tools to manipulate us. And this movie was directed by Denis Villeneuve and Roger Deakins on camera, who framed every single shot himself. There was no B unit. And Denis claims that this might have been one of the closest collaborations between a director and his cameraman in film history. They locked themselves up for months and they created this piece of art together. So I can only imagine how many sleepless nights they spent on how to tell the ending, how to shoot this final scene. And after that, we get 2 or maybe 3 more shots before we fade to black. But if I remember correctly, only one reverse shot over Deckard's shoulder, where you see both of them together in the frame. And it is no fucking coincidence that Deckard casts a shadow or a reflection on the glass plate in front of him, so we clearly see they are separated. She is inside this glass dome like we saw earlier with the retro jukebox that plays lovely songs from the past with a Sinatra hologram or something. Everything we love, or at least seem to remember to have loved. Everything we fought for and suffered for. It's not really there, or at least out of our reach, kept in a cell, in a little box. Cells, interlinked. What's it like to hold the hand of someone you love, interlinked? Do they teach you how to feel finger to finger, interlinked? Do you long for having your heart interlinked, interlinked? Do you dream about being interlinked, interlinked? Have they left a place for you where you can dream interlinked? What's it like to hold your child in your arms, interlinked? Those are the exact words we hear in the baseline test scene earlier, and maybe it's everything we want to hear, and everything we want to see, as the advert for Joy promises us. But we don't get to see it, because the very last shot is a grumpy Harrison Ford trying his best to look melancholic and remorseful, and he extends his hand to his daughter to hold the hand of someone he loves. But he can't reach her, and we don't see the reaction of her. We don't see them together like Deckard and Rachel in the first one. Just one being, alone, who claims he knows what's real and longs to be interlinked.